Decided to start my video on Ancel Keys. Ancel Keys was a physiologist and a physician that did the research called the Seven Countries Research, which is what brought about the understanding of the Mediterranean diet and how the Mediterranean diet promotes health. He's also the one that did the research into how to best fuel soldiers for combat during World War II, for the Americans, of course. So, he was born Ancel Benjamin Keys on the 26th of January, 1904, and he lived until November 20th, 2004. Now, people might ask, why is it important to listen to what this guy said? Well, this guy was a literal centenarian, meaning that he lived to 100 years old. Now, trying to realize the fact that the chances of a regular person just living to 100 years old is not that good unless they know what they're talking about in terms of how to take care of their health. So he was an American physiologist who studied the influence of diet on health. In particular, he hypothesized replacing dietary fat with polyunsaturated fat reduces cardiovascular disease risk. Modern dietary recommendations by health organizations, systemic reviews, and national health agencies corroborate this. He died, Education, University of California at Berkeley, Scripps Institute of Oceanography, King's College, Cambridge, Human Nutrition, K-Ration, Mediterranean Diet, Fields, Human Nutrition, Public Health, Epidemiology, University of Minnesota, August Crow. He also did the starvation study. Yeah, there it is. Keys studied starvation. Remember, everybody talks about the starvation experiment. So he's the one that studied the biology of human starvation by actually starving people. And that's when they found out that starving people makes them obsessed with food and things like that. And this is one of the reasons I'm not really all for aggressive caloric restriction, because it does make somebody crazy and it makes them obsess over food, and they start to become more animal than man in a lot of ways. He examined the epidemiology of cardiovascular disease and was responsible for two famous diets: K-rations, formulated as balanced meals for combat soldiers in World War II, and the Mediterranean diet, which he popularized with his wife Margaret. Ancel Keys was born in this is just rehashing the same stuff. His higher education at the University of California, Berkeley, Keys initially studied chemistry, but was dissatisfied and took some time off to work on an oiler abroad. The American President Line's ship SS President Wilson, which traveled to China. He then returned to Berkeley, switched majors, and graduated with a bachelor's in economics and political science and a master's of science in zoology in 1928. So you can tell this gentleman is very intelligent. For a brief time, he took up a job as a management trainee at Woolworths, but returned to his studies at Scripps Institute of Oceanography and La Jolla on a fellowship. He received his PhD in oceanography and biology from UC Berkeley. He was then awarded National Research Council Fellowship that took him to Copenhagen, Denmark, to study under August Crow at the zoophysiological laboratories for 2 years. During his studies with Crow, he studied fish physiology and contributed numerous papers on the subject. Once his fellowship ended, he went to Cambridge, but took some time off to teach at Harvard University, after which he returned to Cambridge and earned a second PhD in physiology. I'd like to take one thing back. I had thought he was a physician. It does not appear he was a physician. He was a PhD in physiology, it appears, and perhaps biology. While doing fish research at Scripps, Keys would use statistical regressions to estimate the weight of a fish from their length. At that time, a pioneering use of biostatistics. People don't know what biostatistics are. It has to do with measurements of vital signs, weight, height, things of that nature, as well as blood pressure, stuff like that, which was not, and this is the thing, while Dr. Keyes is the father of plant-based dieting and plant-based nutrition and those things, the actual father is Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. However, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg came of age at the cusp of science. So his science, at the cusp of the science of physiology, I should say. So his scientific understanding, while accurate, was not as scientifically grounded. Although it was accurate, it took later people to prove the stuff. Okay, so he would also use this perfusion method to study the effects of adrenaline and vasopressin on gill fluid flow. Vasopressin can actually increase blood flow to the brain. If you read Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw's book, it's a hormone, but it's Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw's book, Life Extension to Science, a Practical and Scientific Approach. They take vasopressin as one of the drugs they take. So he also designed an improved cajole apparatus, which improved upon Krog's earlier design and allowed for more rapid determination of nitrogen content in biological samples. This would prove useful for activities as diverse as determining the protein content in grasshopper eggs and anemia in humans. While at Harvard's fatigue laboratory, he was inspired by his Cambridge mentor, Joseph Barcroft's ascent to the top of Tenerife's highest peak and his subsequent reports. Keyes wrote up a proposal for an expedition to the Andes, suggesting the study could have practical value for Chilean miners who worked at high altitudes, at high elevations. He was given the go-ahead, and in 1935 assembled a team to study the effects of high altitude on body, such as how it affects blood pressure. He spent a couple of months at 9,500 feet, and then 5 weeks at elevations of 15,000 and 20,000 feet, 4,500 to 6,000 meters. He noted that there was no good way of predicting how well humans might adapt to high altitude. Even if they adapted well to medium altitudes, which would be a problem for potential pilots in a time before pressure control had become practical. It was from these studies that he outlined the phenomenon of human physiological adaptation to environmental changes as a predictable event, a novel idea in the time when such parameters as blood pressure and resting heart rate were considered immutable characteristics of individuals. An example of the K ration: in 1936, Keyes was offered a position of the Mayo Foundation in Rochester, where he continued his studies in physiology. He left after a year, citing an intellectually stifling environment where research was secondary to clinical doc business and playing bridge, meaning he didn't think they took the science seriously. In 1937, he left the Mayo Foundation to teach physiology at the University of Minnesota, where he founded the Laboratory of Physiological Hygiene. His earlier research on human physiology eventually led to an assignment with the Army Quartermaster Corps, where they worked to develop a more portable and non-perishable ration that would provide enough calories to sustain soldiers such as paratroopers in the field for up to 2 weeks. This development did not begin without some turbulence, his colleague Dr. Ellsworth Buskirk notes. When it appeared that the U.S. would be in World War II, Keyes went to the Quartermaster Food and Container Institute in Chicago to inquire about emergency rations. The story goes that he was told to go home and leave such things to professionals. Undissuaded, he went to William Wrigley's, the guy that, did the gum. Now, that's the guy he's the one that packed the K rations, office, and secured $10,000 for the development of an emergency ration. Then he went to the Cracker Jack Company, another company that packed rations, They couldn't supply money, but did provide the watertight small box concept. The result was the K ration in sealed Cracker Jack boxes. Once the basic design had been completed, the Navy, through the National Research Council, funded the testing of the K rations on its sailors to determine their feasibility as a temporary and mobile food source. The initial ingredients of the K ration were procured at a local Minneapolis grocery store: hard biscuits, dry sausage, hard candy, and chocolate. The final product was different from Keyes' original product or original ingredients, but most of Keyes' initial suggestions made it to the final product. The rations weighed only 28 ounces, but provided 3,200 calories per day, though a few sources claim the name was unrelated to Keyes. Many historical references support the claim that the K ration became such a success that it was often used for more than temporary sustenance, becoming a major staple of military nutrition. During World War II, Keyes produced various studies related to human physical performance that were of interest to the military, such as studying the effects of testosterone on muscle work and vitamin supplementation as a performance enhancer on adequately fed soldiers. Among many other similar studies, it was during the war that Keyes and fellow researchers recognized the importance of knowing how to properly treat widespread starvation, since simple overfeeding for so many would be imprecise, and there was a potential that the refeeding would fail. Meaning, if you just blatantly feed somebody that's been starving or on severe caloric restriction, you can harm the person or kill the person by overfeeding. So that was determined too, that it can be very unhealthy to just overfeed somebody. You have to feed them properly, proper nourishing food in a way that doesn't cause them harm. To gain insight into the physiology of starvation in 1944, Keyes carried out a starvation study with 36 conscientious objectors. Hey, that's a way to use them. Conscientious objectors as test subjects in the Minnesota starvation experiment. At the time, conscientious objectors were being placed in virtual concentration camps with a few functioning like civilian public service, so that recruiting them would prove easier than seeking out volunteers in the general population. The original pool of 400 responders was reduced to 36 selectees, of whom 32 would go to complete the study. The main focus of the study was threefold: set a metabolic baseline for 3 months, study the physical and mental effects of starvation on the volunteers for 6 months, and then study the physical and mental effects of different refeeding protocols on them for 3 months. The participants would first be placed on the 3-month baseline diet of 3,200 calories. After that should tell you how much more activity people did back then, that 3,200 calories was baseline, whereas today, like right now, I follow 1,800 calories a day, which is considered starvation, which were reduced to 1,800 calories a day while expending, but they were making them expend 3,000 calories in activities such as walking. Okay, the final 3 months were a refeeding period where the volunteers were divided into 4 groups, each receiving a different caloric intake. The war came to an end before the final results of the study could be published, but Keyes sent his findings to various international relief agencies throughout Europe, and by 1950 he completed the publication of his 2-volume, 1,385-page Biology of Human Starvation. His interest in diet and cardiovascular disease was prompted in part by seemingly counterintuitive data. American business executives, presumably among the best-fed people, had high rates of heart disease. See? So, suppose the rich, who are supposedly the best, had the highest rates of cardiovascular disease, okay? While in post-war Europe, cardiovascular disease rates had decreased due to the starvation sharply in the wake of reduced food supplies Keyes postulated a correlation between cholesterol levels and cardiovascular disease and initiated a study of the Minnesota businessmen. At a 1955 expert meeting at the World Health Organization in Geneva, Keyes presented his diet lipid heart disease hypothesis as part. So this is the guy that basically postulated that dyslipidemia could affect heart disease, and you're going to see why that's so important a little later. As part of his argument, he presented a correlation between deaths from heart disease and percentage of fat in the diet that featured 6 countries. His rationale and conclusions was heavily critiqued by 2 other epidemiologists. After observing in southern Italy the highest concentration of centenarians in the world, Keyes hypothesized that a Mediterranean-style diet, low in animal fat, protected against heart disease, and that a diet high in animal fats led to heart disease. This finding helped Keyes initiate a long-term observational study known as the 7-country study, which appeared to show that serum cholesterol was strongly related to coronary heart disease mortality both at the population and the individual level. Keyes concluded that saturated fats, as found in milk and meat, have adverse effects, while unsaturated fats found in vegetable oils had beneficial effects. That's very important to understand because it's been corroborated now too. The message was obscured for a 20-year period starting around 1985 when all dietary fats were considered unhealthy, which is a mistake because the monounsaturated fats and the polyunsaturated fats seem to have health-promoting properties, but yet they still considered them unhealthy. This was driven largely by the hypothesis that all dietary fats cause obesity and cancer. Yes, overeating fats will cause obesity, but overeating anything will cause obesity. A 2015 systematic review and meta-analysis by the Cochrane Collaboration, an organization which promotes evidence-based medicine, found that reducing saturated fat intake reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. Lifestyle advice to all those at risk of cardiovascular disease and lower risk populations. After Keyes' retirement from the University of Minnesota, his protege, Henry Blackburn, medical doctor, became director of the Laboratory of Physiological Hygiene. Blackburn continued research on the role of lifestyle, including diet, in the cause and prevention of heart disease. The department played an active role in multi-center trials of the 1970s and 80s and population strategies of surveillance and preventative interventions in Minnesota. Minnesota coronary experiment. In 1968, about 10 years after the beginning and 2 years after the first publication of the results of the 7-country study, Keyes and Ivan Frantz initiated a large randomized controlled trial replacing saturated fats by food items with naturally high or artificially raised content of linoleic acid, which is a polyunsaturated fat, in an intervention group. The randomized and double-blind experiment ended in 1973. Results were not published until only much later in the form of smaller excerpts as part of conference talks or doctoral theses. The raw data and analysis were discovered in 2013 in the estate of the principal investigator, Ivan Frantz. The study shows no positive effects of altered dietary intake, cardiovascular mortality, or of patients over 65 years of age increased by replacement of saturated fats. Results of intervention group had significant reduction in serum cholesterol compared with controls. Graph showed no mortality benefit. However, they did have a reduction in serum cholesterol. But you have to understand, these people are over 65 that you're seeing this in. Graph showed no mortality benefit for the intervention group in the full randomized cohort, or higher risk of there was a 22% higher risk of death for each 30 milligram per deciliter reduction in serum cholesterol. Conclusions: available evidence from randomized controls trials shows that replacement of saturated fats in the diet with linoleic acid effectively lowers serum cholesterol but does not support the hypothesis. However, the later studies do. Now remember, you can go to this and read this. The Sugar Controversy in 1972, Pure, White, and Deadly was published by John Yudkin for a lay readership. Its intention was to summarize the evidence that the overconsumption of sugar was leading 2, greatly increased incidence of coronary thrombosis, and that in addition it was certainly involved in dental caries, probably involved in obesity, diabetes, and liver disease, and probably involved in gout, dyspepsia, and some cancers. Yudkin ended the first chapter. I hope that when you have read this book, I shall have convinced you that sugar is really dangerous. This message was extremely unwelcome to the sugar industry, manufacturers of processed foods. The final chapter of Pure, White, and Deadly lists several examples of attempts to interfere with the funding of his research and to prevent its publication. It also refers to rancorous language and personal smears used by Ancel Keys to dismiss the evidence. Now, this is the reason that you can't go by one professional, because you have to understand, Yudkin is correct about sugar, but Ancel Keys is right about dyslipidemia and fats. So this is the problem. You have to go by what actual evidence shows, not by what professionals show. You see, Keys is right about the dyslipidemia, and Yudkin is right about the sugar. But Keys wrote, it's clear that Yudkin has no theoretical basis or experimental evidence to support his claims for major influential, but let's clear that. For his claim of major influence of dietary sucrose in the etiology of cardiovascular disease, his claim that men who have cardiovascular of sugar eaters is nowhere confirmed, but is disproved by many studies superior to method. Okay, the efforts to discredit the case against sugar were largely successful, which is a shame. It's a shame, because sugar is pure, white, and deadly. Yudkin's arguments and evidence for the dangers of sugar were the focus of several articles in the British Medical Journal of January 19th, 2013. In 2009, Robert Lustig, a pediatric endocrinologist of the University of California, San Francisco Medical School, who has special interest in childhood obesity, made a video called Sugar, the Bitter Truth. Lustig had independently rediscovered and confirmed Yudkin's findings. Okay, so you have to understand, this was confirmed by another doctor, and this is why you have to understand that you can't simply go by what some health guru says. You actually have to do your own research. So BMI and other contributions in a 1972 article, Keys and his co-authors promoted Adolf Quetelet's body mass index as preferable over other indices of relative weight or on correlation with height and measure of body fatness, as well as on simplicity and of calculation. You have to understand, a lot of people be like, BMI isn't accurate. The BMI isn't accurate. Unless you're built like Arnold Schwarzenegger at his prime, generally speaking, if your BMI is over what it should be, you're probably fat. Okay? Now, if you're built very nicely with a lot of muscle, that's not going to be the case. A lot of professional athletes are over their BMI, but that's because of lean body mass. So unless you have a lot of lean body mass, your BMI is going to be, gonna be a certain way. So like if you don't have a lot of lean body mass and you have a high BMI, you're probably fat. Okay, or actually you're definitely fat if you don't have a lot of lean body mass. When Keys was hired at Mayo Foundation, together Margaret and Keys co-authored 3 books, 2 of them bestsellers. They earned enough royalties to build Minalia, their villa in seaside village of Piopi in the Cliento region on southwest coast of Italy, where Keys lived and worked from 1963 to 1998. They also traveled the world, going to places like Japan and South Africa to record data for Keys' published works, such as the 7-country study. The village of Piopi became the location of the Living Museum of the Mediterranean Diet, which houses a documentary, photograph, and film archive regarding the historic, scientific, and cultural background of the Mediterranean diet. Keys appeared on the To Tell the Truth game, show as an inventor of K-rations, fooling 2 of the 4 panelists. Keyes received 3 notable awards: Commander Order of the Lion of Finland, the McCollum Award from the American Society of Clinical Nutrition, and an honorary Doctor of Science from the University of Minnesota. Keyes died on November 20th, 2004 in Minneapolis, 2 months before his 101st birthday. That's why it's important that you actually understand what he's saying, because he almost made it to 101. How many carnivore dieters do you think are going to make it to 101? Okay, books, okay, The Biology of Human Starvation, Eat Well and Stay Well, The Benevolent Bean, How to Eat Well and Stay Well the Mediterranean Way, 7 Countries, a Multivariate Analysis of Death and Coronary Heart Disease, Adventures of a Medical Scientist, 60 Years of Research in 13 Countries, a memoir. These are very important books, okay? Now, The Benevolent Bean I find very interesting. I've never read that, but it sounds very interesting. The reason why is because beans are the one thing that the majority of people in the blue zones have in common is eating a bean-heavy diet. Now, I'm going to move on to some other research here. So this here is about the launching of the 7 countries research. This is from the 7countrystudy.com. I encourage people to check it out. So Ancel Keys, 1904 to 2004, launched the 7-country study in 1958 after exploratory research on the relationship between dietary pattern and the prevalence of coronary heart disease in Greece, Italy, Spain, South Africa, Japan, and Finland. So you have to understand, this guy's not just pulling things out of his ass. This is real research that proved these things, and he lived almost to 101. He started his academic career as a biologist, obtaining blah, blah, blah. How does dietary fat influence blood lipids? Keyes could pursue... During the first era, he was pioneering in the right direction, pointing out the cardioprotective effect of the Mediterranean diet and the Keyes equation on the effect of different dietary fatty acids on serum cholesterol, both of which are still widely studied today. Keyes was a professor and director of the Laboratory of Physiological Hygiene at the University of Minnesota School of Public Health. He received various honors from countries he worked in, and he and his wife Margaret wrote 2 best-selling cookbooks, Eat Well and Stay Well, and How to Eat Well and Stay Well the Mediterranean Way. He remained dedicated to, okay, let's see here. And this is, let's move on. So I'm going to close out this first video after I go over the traditional diets. Okay, this oldwayspt.org was highly influenced by the research, and I highly recommend people go to oldwayspt.org. But I'm going to close out this video after I go over the traditional diets here and show people why traditional diets, what a traditional diet is, and how to consume a traditional diet. So, why traditional diets? Traditional diets are a delicious roadmap to healthy eating rather than relying on highly processed foods that are stripped of their nutrients, flavor, and even calories. Traditional diets celebrate the abundance of Earth's offerings, highlighting seasonal, regional produce, hearty recipes, and pleasures of the table. Our ancestors have a lot to teach us about not letting fresh food go to waste and how to eat seasonally. After all, blah, blah, blah. Most people have pretty good idea that fruits and vegetables and whole grains are good for them. But figuring out what to do with these foods or how to eat them is where a lot of people get stuck. Luckily, the recipes, food pairings, and cultural traditions of these historic cuisines act as an enticing guide for how to work a variety of nutritious ingredients into a cohesive, healthy lifestyle. Okay? And this is evidence for the traditional diets, studies, blah, blah, blah. Of course, you can visit this website, and I encourage you to visit this website, what makes traditional diets different. At first glance, a Mediterranean diet might seem vastly different from Asian or African cooking, but in reality, these rich cuisines are much more alike than they are different. Remember, I've been saying that diets that promote health have commonalities. That's what the Blue Zone research found. That's what the 7 countries research found. That's what any research will find, because human physiology is remarkably similar. How the pyramids help us illustrate healthy diets. Pyramids, plates, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, that's okay. So I'm going to move on. So what does the Mediterranean diet pyramid look like? So as you can see, you want to get daily activity. Okay, you want to base your diet in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, healthy plant foods. Then it's fish, then poultry, and a tiny bit of meat. So meats and sweets are at the very top. You want to have wine in moderation according to this. I don't suggest wine because it's carcinogenic. Alcohol is carcinogenic. I don't suggest people drink wine. But as I say that, keep in mind, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a dietitian, not a nurse practitioner, not an LPN, not an RN, not a chiropractor, not a nutritionist, not a dietitian, nothing like that. And also drink water. Okay, 8 steps to getting started on the Mediterranean diet. Eat lots of vegetables. Change the way you think about meat, meaning think about meat more like a condiment. Enjoy some dairy products. Eat seafood twice a week. Cook a vegetarian meal once a week. Use good fats. Switch to whole grains. For dessert, eat fresh fruit. Foods and flavors of the Mediterranean diet. I already went through this in a previous video, but it's important that people understand these things. Okay, African heritage diet. So let's see about this one. Okay, boost flavor with spice. Make vegetables the star of your plate. Change the way you think about meat. Again, think about meat as a flavor enhancer, not as the main course. Make rice and beans your new staple. Enjoy vegetable mashes and medleys of eggplants, beans, grains, onions, and seasonings. Find real foods everywhere. Family support and food fellowship. Make room for celebration foods. I don't agree with that, but whatever. Jazz up fruits for desserts, and drink to your health, meaning a splash of flavor can make water, not wine, water, your go-to drink. Add crushed fruits or small amounts of 100% fruit juice to water or sparkling water. Okay, this is 8 steps to better health through the Asian tradition. So eat mindfully, make vegetables the star, not the supporting actor. Use meat as a garnish, enjoy soy, fill up with hot soups, drink tea and water, share meals with others, and be physically active. How to get started on a traditional, what is a vegetarian diet? How to get started on a traditional vegetarian diet. Okay, build your breakfasts around oatmeal, whole grain cereal, or a slice of whole grain bread. Spread with guacamole. What I want to be sure people understand, if whole grain cereal is pre-sweetened, don't eat it. Eat things like oatmeal or bran flakes. If it's lightly sweetened, you might be able to get away with it, but be careful with that. Check the sugar, because if it's high in sugar, don't eat it. Make a vegetarian meal one night a week. Include beans, whole grains, vegetables, herbs, and spices in a simple saute or stew. Then try 2 nights a week, then 3. Meaning slowly incorporate more vegetarian foods into the diet. Fill at least half your plate with salad greens and cooked or raw vegetables. Reach for healthy fats. Include small amounts of nuts, peanuts, nut butters, seeds, olives, avocados, and olive oil, or other plant oils in your daily meals. Build a meal around salad. Fill a bowl with delicious salad greens. Add an assortment of chopped fruit and roasted vegetables, nuts, fresh herbs, beans, and sprouts, and finish off with flavored vinegar or your favorite dressing. Include a side of barley, quinoa, brown rice, farro, or other whole grains. Go for the greens. Drink plenty of water throughout the day, and reach for water as a beverage with meals. Eat fresh or dried fruit for dessert. I would go against that, honestly. I would not. I would maybe as a very small amount as a condiment, but not because they're too high in fructose. Okay, sit down with friends or family as often as possible to enjoy a meal together. So this is the YouTube channel for Old Ways, and we're going to look at the playlists here to help people understand. Okay, you got webinars here, free webinars, free cooking classes. Okay, so what are the cooking classes? Cooking with Old Ways Ethiopian Heritage, Cooking with Old Ways Moroccan Heritage, Cooking with Old Ways Irish Heritage, Cooking with Old Ways Sicilian Heritage, Cooking with Old Ways New England Heritage, Vegan Armenian Recipes, Cooking with Old Ways Armenian Heritage, Cooking with Old Ways Vegetarian Heritage, Cooking with Old Ways African Heritage, Cooking with Old Ways Asian Heritage. So it can show you how to cook these healthy foods so that you can eat these healthy foods. Indian Heritage, Armenian desserts, how to host a healthy French dinner party, cooking demo. Okay, webinars, vegan Armenian recipes, understanding whole grain processing, webinar maternal and early childhood feeding, webinar curry dal and ghee, webinar early infant feeding, unlocking the cardiovascular benefits of tea, how retail dietitians create value with Mediterranean favorites, the RD's role in dental health. Okay, so take a look at this. Economics of whole grain and public health, brain health in the Mediterranean diet, shaking up the breadbasket, integrating ancient grains, food questions and answers, are Shia, whatever, spicy, how to order best street food, what is raw honey, how to store fresh bread, how to make everyday Mediterranean, how to make pasta from scratch, how to make muhammara easy, are peanuts a good source of protein, capers a Mediterranean diet, how to buy olive oil, tips from the experts, easiest way to eat more vegetables, the history and science of the Mediterranean diet, most common misconceptions about the Mediterranean diet, what the pre-dimed study say about the Mediterranean diet, best seafood cooking tips, sustainable seafood, what does it mean? Okay, these are things, plant-forward eating in the future, plant-based diet Q&A. This is important stuff for people to understand. Are beans good for you? Can you have alcohol and dessert on the Mediterranean diet? What are the health benefits of the Mediterranean diet? Should you eat plant-based meat? What do heritage diets have in common? Okay, and that's about a conversation with Dariush, whatever. Okay, when is the best time to eat dinner? Study abroad for dietitians. Okay, and I'm going to call it on this video right here. Oh wait, easiest way to peel a pomegranate. There you go. And then I'm going to call it quits on this video, and I'm going to start with part 2 later today.